The saloon fell silent the moment Prudence Owens walked through the door, not because men wanted to look at her, but because they wanted to make sure they would not have to. She had learned years ago that silence was its own kind of cruelty, sharper than any spoken insult, and she kept her eyes down as she made her way toward the bar where her father stood polishing glasses with hands that shook more each passing day. The year was 1879, and Hachita, New Mexico was nothing more than a collection of sun-bleached buildings clinging to existence in the desert heat, a place where water was scarce and kindness even more so. "Your father is drunk again, Mrs. Henderson had told her that morning, her voice carrying that particular mix of pity and disgust that Prudence had come to recognize as the soundtrack of her life. "You best get down to the Silver Strike before he gives away more whiskey than he sells." Prudence was 22 years old, and she had spent every one of those years learning that her eyes were wrong. Not just plain or unremarkable, but wrong in a way that made people uncomfortable. They were two different colors, the left one a deep brown like rich soil after rain, the right one a pale gray blue like winter sky. Heterochromia, the doctor had called it when she was young, before adding that it was nothing to worry about physically, though his own gaze had slid away from hers as he spoke. Her mother had died bringing her into this world, and Prudence sometimes wondered if God had marked her eyes as punishment, a reminder that her very existence had cost a life. "Get in the back," her father muttered now, not looking at her as she approached. Thomas Owens had once been a proud man, or so the old-timers said, but whiskey and grief had worn him down to something hollow. "Do not need you scaring off customers." She bit back the response that there were only 3 customers in the entire saloon, none of whom looked capable of being scared by anything short of sobriety, and instead slipped behind the bar toward the storage room. This was her life, lived in the margins and shadows, always half hidden because her presence was considered an embarrassment. The storage room was hot and cramped, smelling of dust and old wood, but it was familiar. She had spent hours here over the years, counting bottles and taking inventory, making herself useful in ways that did not require her to be seen. She was organizing a shipment of whiskey that had arrived that morning when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of a chair scraping across the floor, her father's slurred attempt at peacekeeping. Prudence closed her eyes and wished, not for the first time, that she had been born anywhere else, as anyone else. "I said get out." That was Buck Morrison, one of the regulars, a mean-spirited man who got meaner with every drink. "Ain't serving no half-breed in here." Prudence moved to the door, peering through the crack. A man stood just inside the saloon entrance, and even from her limited vantage point, she could see he was unlike anyone she had encountered in Hachita before. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into something that might have been carved from the mountains themselves. He wore buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, and there was a rifle slung across his back with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. "Just looking for supplies," the man said, his voice deep and calm despite Buck's aggression. "No trouble." "Your kind is always trouble," Buck spat, taking a step forward. He was drunk enough to be brave, stupid enough to think size did not matter. "We do not want you here." The big man's jaw tightened, but he did not move. Prudence found herself holding her breath, waiting for violence, but instead the stranger simply nodded once and turned to leave. Something about his restraint, the dignity in his retreat, made her chest ache. She knew what it was like to be unwanted, to have your very presence deemed offensive through no fault of your own. Wait. The word was out of her mouth before she could stop it, and she pushed through the storage room door into the main saloon. Every eye turned to her, and she felt the familiar wave of discomfort wash over her as men registered her mismatched gaze and looked away. Every eye except the stranger's. He had turned back at her voice, and now he stood perfectly still, looking directly at her with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow was not. "We have supplies," Prudence continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "Salt pork, beans, coffee if you need it. Fair prices." "Prudence, get back in the storage room," her father said, but there was no force behind it, just weary resignation. "Let the freak serve the half-breed," Buck laughed, a ugly sound that made her skin crawl. "Seems fitting." The stranger's eyes narrowed dangerously at that, his whole body tensing like a coiled spring. But Prudence spoke quickly before the situation could escalate. "What do you need?" For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Prudence realized with a start that he was not looking away. He was meeting her gaze fully, seeing her mismatched eyes and not flinching, not turning aside, not treating her like something shameful to be hidden. It was so unexpected that she almost forgot her question. "Coffee," he said finally. "Beans, flour if you have it. Enough for 2 weeks in the high country. I can get that for you." She moved behind the bar, acutely aware of the silence that had fallen over the saloon again, different this time, watchful and waiting. Her hands shook slightly as she began gathering supplies, but she forced them steady. "You heading into the mountains?" "Yes." He followed her movement with his eyes, still not looking away from her face. It was disconcerting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Trapping season. Long way to come for supplies. She wrapped the salt pork in brown paper, her movements practiced and efficient. "There are trading posts closer to the high country. Heard Hachita had fair prices." Something that might have been humor flickered across his face. "Heard wrong, maybe." Despite everything, Prudence felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. "The supplies are fair priced. The people are free with their opinions." "I noticed." He stepped closer to the bar, and she could see now that his eyes were a deep green, the color of pine forest she had only read about in books. His face was strong-featured, all hard angles and sharp lines, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with the kind of presence that came from men who lived by their own strength and wits. "What do I owe you?" She calculated quickly in her head, giving him the honest price rather than the inflated numbers her father had taken to charging in his desperation. $3 even. He pulled coins from a leather pouch at his belt, counting them out carefully. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. When he placed the money on the bar, his fingers brushed hers, and Prudence felt a shock run through her at the contact. She pulled back quickly, confused by her own reaction. "Thank you," he said, gathering his supplies. Then, just before he turned to leave, he added, "Your eyes." Prudence felt her stomach drop. Here it came, the comment that would ruin this strange, brief interaction, the observation that would remind her of her wrongness. She braced herself, looking down at the bar. "Yes, they are remarkable." His voice was quiet, meant for her alone. "Like earth and sky meeting at the horizon, beautiful in a way that makes a man remember what beauty is supposed to mean." Her head snapped up, certain she had misheard, but he was already moving toward the door, his supplies bundled under one powerful arm. She stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened, unable to reconcile those words with every experience she had ever had. "Freak calling a freak beautiful," Buck muttered from his table. "Now I have seen everything." The stranger stopped in the doorway, and for a moment Prudence thought he might turn back, might prove Buck wrong about the trouble his kind supposedly caused. But instead he just shifted his bundle and walked out into the afternoon heat, disappearing down the dusty street like he had never been there at all. Prudence touched her face unconsciously, her fingers trembling. Remarkable. Beautiful. Words that had never been applied to her, certainly never to her eyes, the thing that had marked her as other since birth. She felt something crack open in her chest, some small space she had not known was sealed shut. "Get those coins before your father drinks them, Mrs. Henderson said from the corner where she had been watching the whole exchange. Her voice was not unkind, which was as close to gentle as the old woman got. "And do not go getting ideas, girl. Men like that are just passing through. Always are." Prudence collected the coins, still feeling the ghost of his touch on her fingers, still hearing those 3 words that had somehow changed everything and nothing all at once. She did not know the stranger's name. She did not know if she would ever see him again. But she knew that, for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her eyes and seen something worth remarking on for reasons that had nothing to do with their wrongness. It would have to be enough. That night, Prudence lay in her narrow bed above the saloon, listening to the familiar sounds of her father stumbling around downstairs, and she allowed herself to remember the stranger's face. The way he had looked at her directly, without flinching or turning aside. The deep calm of his voice when he spoke those words that kept echoing in her mind. She told herself she was being foolish, that Mrs. Henderson was right, that men like that were just passing through, and she would never see him again. But when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of pine forests and mountain peaks, of places where the air was clean and cold, and people did not judge you by the color of your eyes. The next 3 days passed in their usual monotony. Prudence worked in the saloon, mostly in the back where customers would not have to see her, and tried not to think about the stranger. She failed spectacularly. Every time the saloon door opened, her heart would jump, hoping to see that broad-shouldered silhouette filling the frame. It never was. Instead, it was the usual collection of drifters and locals, men who drank too much and said too little, who treated her as part of the furniture at best and an unfortunate blight at worst. On the 4th day, her father did not wake up. Prudence found him in his room behind the saloon, lying on his cot with his mouth open and his skin the color of old paper. The doctor confirmed what she already knew. His heart had finally given out, worn down by years of alcohol and despair. She felt a strange numbness as she made the arrangements, paying for the burial with money she had been saving in a tin under her floorboards. Thomas Owens had not been a good father, but he had been the only family she had, and now she was completely alone. The funeral was sparsely attended. Mrs. Henderson came, and the Reverend, and a handful of men who had drunk her father's whiskey over the years. Prudence stood by the grave in her one black dress, which was too tight in the shoulders and too short at the hem, and she felt the weight of eyes on her. Not sympathetic eyes, calculating eyes. She was a woman alone now, with a saloon to her name and no protection. In a town like Hachita, that made her vulnerable. "You will need to sell," Mrs. Henderson said after the service, walking Prudence back toward town. "A woman cannot run a saloon alone. It is not proper. What choice do I have?" Prudence kept her voice low, aware of the men trailing behind them, listening. "The saloon is all I have. Mary." Mrs. Henderson said it like it was obvious. "There are men who would take you despite. Well, there are men who need a wife and are not too particular, despite her eyes. Despite her wrongness. Despite the fact that she would be a charity case, a burden taken on by some man desperate or kind enough to overlook her flaws. Prudence felt something harden in her chest. "I will run the saloon myself. Child, that is not, I know the business. I have been doing the real work for years while my father drank himself to death. Prudence stopped walking, turning to face the older woman. "I can do this." Mrs. Henderson looked at her for a long moment, and something like respect flickered in her eyes. "Maybe you can. But the men in this town will not make it easy." She was right. Over the next week, Prudence discovered just how right. Suppliers tried to cheat her on prices, assuming she would not know the difference. Customers grew rowdier, testing her authority, seeing if she could control the room the way her father had. Someone broke a window in the middle of the night. Someone else left a dead rat on the doorstep. Small cruelties designed to drive her out, to force her to sell to one of the men who had already started making offers at prices far below what the saloon was worth. Prudence endured it all with a stubbornness she had not known she possessed. She cleaned up the glass and the rat. She threw out the drunks who got too rowdy, wielding her father's old shotgun with a determination that surprised everyone, including herself. She negotiated with suppliers, using her knowledge of the business to call out their inflated prices. It was exhausting and frightening and lonely, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, she was not hiding in the back room. She was standing in full view, mismatched eyes and all, daring the world to tell her she could not do this. It was in the middle of this struggle, 2 weeks after her father's death, that the stranger came back. Prudence was behind the bar, mediating a dispute between 2 minors over a card game, when the door opened and that familiar silhouette filled the frame. Her heart stuttered in her chest, and for a moment she forgot what she had been saying. He looked the same as before, all broad shoulders and quiet strength, his dark hair loose around his face now instead of tied back. His green eyes swept the room, assessing before landing on her. The minors forgotten, she found herself moving toward him, drawn by something she could not name. "You came back, needed more supplies." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Heard about your father. I am sorry." The condolence sounded genuine, which was more than most people had offered. Prudence nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. "Thank you. What can I get for you?" Same as before. "Coffee, beans, salt pork." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "Heard you are running the place yourself now. That true?" "It is." She lifted her chin, slightly defensive. "Is that a problem?" "No." The corner of his mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile, but close. "It is impressive." That word again from him. Remarkable before, impressive now. Prudence felt warmth spread through her chest, and she turned quickly toward the storage room to hide the flush she felt creeping up her neck. "I will get your supplies." She gathered what he needed, taking her time to compose herself. When she returned, he was leaning against the bar, watching the room with that same assessing gaze. Up close, she could see the details she had missed before. The small scars on his hands, the worn but well-maintained state of his clothing, the way he held himself with the stillness of someone who was always aware of his surroundings. $3, she said, setting the supplies on the bar. He counted out the money, then added an extra $1. "For the trouble." "It is no trouble." She pushed the extra coin back toward him. "I gave you a fair price." "I know." He pushed it back toward her. "Keep it anyway." They stood there for a moment, the coin between them, and Prudence felt the weight of something unspoken building in the space. Finally, she took the $1 and put it in the cash box. "Thank you. You know my name," he said suddenly, "or I should say you do not know it." "That seems unfair since I know yours." "Prudence, right? How did you know that?" asked around. He held out his hand, large and scarred and steady. "Emmett Ellis." She took his hand, feeling that same shock of contact she had experienced before, only stronger this time. His grip was warm and firm, and she had the strange sensation that she was safer in this moment than she had been in weeks. "It is good to meet you properly, Emmett Ellis." "Good to meet you properly too." Prudence Owens. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that might have been unconscious but felt deliberate. When he released her, she felt the absence of his touch like a physical thing. "You are alone here, running this place by yourself, Mrs. Henderson helps sometimes, and I can handle myself." She said it with more confidence than she felt, but his concerned expression made her want to prove it was true. "I have my father's shotgun and I am not afraid to use it. I believe you." He glanced around the saloon again, taking in the broken window that she had covered with boards, the scuff marks on the floor from recent scuffles. "Still, it is a hard thing being alone in a place like this." "I have been alone my whole life," Prudence said before she could stop herself. "This is just a different kind of alone." Emmett's eyes came back to hers, and she saw understanding there, recognition of a pain he knew personally. "Yes," he said quietly, "I suppose it is." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them said. Finally, Emmett gathered his supplies and straightened. "I should go, but Prudence—" "Yes, I will be back." He said it like a promise, like something she could count on. 2 weeks, maybe less. Need to check my trap lines and bring the pelts to Santa Fe for trading, but I will be back. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and watched him walk out into the afternoon sun. After he was gone, she stood behind the bar for a long time, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating too fast, trying to understand what was happening to her. She barely knew this man. He was a stranger, a drifter, exactly the kind of person Mrs. Henderson had warned her about, but when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. When he spoke to her, she felt like her words mattered. When he touched her hand, she felt alive. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever felt. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Prudence's life. She worked the saloon, managing the daily struggles and small victories, but part of her mind was always counting down the days, wondering if Emmett would really come back or if she had imagined the promise in his voice. "Mrs. Henderson noticed her distraction and clicked her tongue disapprovingly, but said nothing. The old woman had a way of seeing more than she let on. On the 13th day, Buck Morrison decided to make his move. He came into the saloon midday, when Prudence was alone, wiping down tables and taking inventory. She heard the door open and turned, already knowing from the heavy footsteps that it was trouble. Buck was a big man, not as tall as Emmett but thick through the middle, with mean little eyes and breath that always smelled of whiskey. "Prudence," he said, his voice falsely friendly, "we need to talk business." She straightened, putting the bar between them. "What kind of business?" "The kind where I buy this place from you, give you a fair price, more than fair considering the state it is in." He moved closer, and she could smell the alcohol on him even from several feet away. "You cannot run this place alone. Everyone knows it. Time to stop being stubborn and accept reality." "I am running it just fine," Prudence said, keeping her voice steady. "And it is not for sale. Everything is for sale at the right price." Buck leaned against the bar, too close, invading her space deliberately. "I am offering you $500. That is generous for a run-down saloon with a broken window and a reputation for trouble. $500 was insulting. The property alone was worth twice that, and the business, despite recent troubles, was still profitable. "No thank you." "No thank you," Buck mimicked, his voice turning nasty. "You think you have a choice here, girl. You think anyone in this town is going to let you keep running this place. You are a freak and an embarrassment, and the only reason I am even making this offer is because I feel sorry for you." Prudence felt anger flare hot in her chest, burning away the fear. "Get out." "Or what?" Buck straightened, his bulk blocking her path to the storage room where she kept the shotgun. You going to throw me out? You going to shoot me? We both know you do not have the spine for that." He reached across the bar, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. Prudence tried to pull away, but his grip was iron tight, and panic started to replace the anger. She opened her mouth to scream, but Buck's other hand came up, covering it, and suddenly she was being dragged across the bar toward him. "Thought about this for a while now," Buck breathed, his face inches from hers. "Thought about what it would be like, having you under me, those freak eyes looking up while he never finished the sentence. The saloon door slammed open with enough force to shake the walls, and suddenly Buck was flying backward, released so abruptly that Prudence fell forward against the bar. She looked up to see Emmett standing there, his face a mask of cold fury, one hand fisted in Buck's collar. "She told you to get out," Emmett said, his voice deadly quiet. "I suggest you listen." Buck tried to bluster, tried to pull away, but Emmett lifted him off his feet like he weighed nothing. The mountain man's muscles strained against his buckskin shirt, power coiled and controlled. "Let me go, you half-breed bastard." "I will let you go," Emmett said, and there was something terrifying in his calm. "But if you ever touch her again, if you ever speak to her with anything less than respect, I will break every bone in your hand so you remember why. Do we understand each other?" He punctuated the question by slamming Buck against the wall hard enough to rattle bottles on the shelves. Buck's face went white, and he nodded frantically. Emmett held him there for another long moment, then released him. Buck scrambled for the door, shooting a venomous look back at both of them before disappearing into the street. Silence filled the saloon. Prudence stood frozen behind the bar, her wrist throbbing where Buck had grabbed her, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Emmett turned toward her, and the cold fury drained from his face, replaced by concern. "Are you hurt?" He crossed to her in 2 long strides, his hands hovering near her shoulders, wanting to touch but not quite daring. "Did he hurt you?" "My wrist," Prudence managed, her voice shaking. Now that the immediate danger was past, she could feel the reaction setting in, her whole body trembling. "But I am all right. You came back. I said I would." His hands finally settled on her shoulders, gentle despite their size and strength. "I should have come sooner, should have been here. Prudence, I am so sorry. You could not have known." She looked up at him, at those green eyes filled with concern and anger on her behalf, and something inside her broke open completely. "He wanted to buy the saloon. He has been pressuring me for days, but today I know what he wanted." Emmett's jaw was tight, his hands tightening fractionally on her shoulders. "Let me see your wrist." She held out her arm, and he took it carefully, his touch impossibly gentle for such large hands. The skin was already bruising, dark marks in the shape of fingers. Emmett's expression darkened, and Prudence could see him fighting for control. "I should go back out there and finish what I started," he said, but he did not move, did not release her arm. Instead, he cradled it carefully, his thumb tracing the air just above the bruises, not touching but clearly wishing he could take away the hurt. "I should make sure he never even thinks about you again." "He will not." Prudence said it with more certainty than she felt, but having Emmett here, solid and protective and furious on her behalf, made her believe it might be true. "You scared him. I could see it. Good." Emmett finally looked up from her wrist to her face, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Prudence, I have been thinking about you since the day I first walked into this saloon. Been thinking about your eyes, your voice, the way you stood up for me when no one else would. I came back early because I could not stop thinking about you being here alone, facing men like Buck without anyone to protect you." "I can protect myself," she said automatically, but the words lacked conviction. "I know you can." His hands slid from her shoulders down to her hands, cradling them carefully. You are the strongest woman I have ever met, running this place alone, standing up to people who want to break you down. But that does not mean you should have to. That does not mean you deserve to be alone." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "I have always been alone. People do not. They look at me and all they see is wrong. My eyes, the way I look, it makes them uncomfortable. Even my own father could barely stand to look at me." "Then your father was a fool." Emmett released one of her hands to cup her face, tilting it up so she had to meet his gaze. "And anyone who cannot see how extraordinary you are is blind. I have thought about almost nothing else for 2 weeks. Your eyes that change color in different light, brown and blue mixing like earth and sky. The way you stood up to Buck, even when you were frightened. The way you gave me fair prices when you could have cheated me. The strength it takes to run this place alone and refuse to give up even when everyone wants you to fail." "Emmett," she whispered, overwhelmed by the rush of feeling his words unleashed. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she mattered, like her strangeness was something to be celebrated rather than hidden. "I want to stay," he said, and she could see how much the admission cost him, this man who lived alone in the mountains, who probably trusted people even less than she did. "If you will let me, I want to stay in Hachita. Want to make sure Buck and anyone else who might get ideas knows that you are not alone anymore. Want to know that you are safe. You do not even know me." But even as she said it, she knew it was not true. In the strange way of souls recognizing each other, she felt like Emmett knew her better than people who had lived in Hachita her whole life. "I know enough." His thumb stroked across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "I know that you are brave and honest and kind. I know that when you look at me, you do not see a half-breed or a drifter or something to be afraid of. You just see me. And when I look at you, all I see is the most beautiful woman I have ever met." "I am not beautiful," Prudence said, but the protest was weak. Looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute conviction there, it was hard to hold onto the beliefs that had been carved into her since childhood. "You are to me." Emmett said it simply, like it was an irrefutable fact. "You are everything to me, and I know that probably sounds insane because we barely know each other, but I have spent years alone in those mountains, Prudence. Years with nothing but my thoughts and the silence. And in all that time, I never felt lonely until I walked away from you. Never felt like something was missing until I knew what it was like to stand in your presence and have you treat me like a human being worth kindness." She could not stop the tears now, could not hold back the sob that broke from her chest. Emmett made a sound of distress and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Prudence buried her face against his chest and let herself cry for the first time since her father died. Let herself cry for all the years of loneliness and rejection, for the cruel words and crueler silences, for the belief that had been ground into her that she was wrong and unlovable. She cried, and Emmett held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words too soft to hear but soothing nonetheless. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I do not want you to stay out of pity. This is not pity." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his severe face into something warm and open. "This is a man who spent 2 weeks in the mountains trying to convince himself he was not falling in love with a woman he met twice, failing spectacularly, and coming back to see if maybe, possibly, she might feel even a fraction of the same." "Falling in love," Prudence repeated, testing the words. They should have sounded impossible, ridiculous even. Instead, they sounded right. "You barely know me. Then let me know you better." Emmett's hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing the skin beneath her eyes with infinite gentleness. Let me stay and learn everything there is to learn. How you take your coffee in the morning, what makes you laugh, what you dream about when you let yourself dream. Let me be here, Prudence. Let me prove that you do not have to be alone anymore. She should have said no. Should have protected herself. Should have remembered that people always left, always disappointed, always found reasons why she was not enough. But looking into Emmett's eyes, she found she did not want to protect herself. She wanted to take the risk, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this man meant what he said. Yes, she whispered. Stay. The kiss was inevitable, had been from the moment he walked back through the door. Emmett lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Prudence rose on her toes to meet him halfway. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding, and she felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a room she had never known existed. She had never been kissed before, had never even imagined anyone would want to kiss her, but Emmett kissed her like she was precious, like she was worth savoring. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Emmett rested his forehead against hers. I will build us a good life, he promised. I have money saved from trapping. Not a fortune, but enough. I can help with the saloon, keep trouble out, make sure people know you are protected. And when winter comes, if you want, we can close the place for a few months and I will take you to the mountains. Show you the places I go when I need to remember the world can be beautiful. The mountains, Prudence said, thinking of her dreams of pine forests and clean air. I would like that. Then it is settled. Emmett pulled her close again, and she went willingly, tucking herself against his chest and feeling safer than she ever had in her life. You and me, Prudence Owens, we are going to make them all see what I have known from the first moment I looked into your remarkable eyes. What is that? That you are extraordinary, and that any man lucky enough to be loved by you is the richest man alive. She smiled against his shirt, letting herself believe it, and for the first time in her life, the future looked like something worth hoping for. The news that Prudence Owens had taken up with the half-breed mountain man spread through Hachita like wildfire. Within a day, everyone knew that Emmett Ellis had moved into the room above the saloon, that he had threatened Buck Morrison on her behalf, that the two of them were courting with an openness that shocked the more conservative residents. The reaction was mixed at best. Some people, like Mrs. Henderson, seemed grudgingly approving. Others, like Buck and his friends, were openly hostile. Prudence discovered she did not care as much as she thought she would. With Emmett beside her, the weight of judgment seemed lighter somehow. He helped her run the saloon, his massive presence alone enough to discourage trouble. Men who had been testing her boundaries suddenly became respectful. Suppliers who had tried to cheat her started offering fair prices when Emmett stood at her shoulder, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. The saloon began to run more smoothly than it had in years, and Prudence found herself actually enjoying the work when it was not a constant battle. More than that, she discovered what it was like to be cared for. Emmett was attentive in ways she had never experienced, bringing her coffee in the morning made exactly how she liked it after he paid attention to how much sugar she added. He fixed the broken window and reinforced the door. He built her a new set of shelves for the storage room when he noticed her struggling to reach the high ones. Small gestures that said, I see you, I care, you matter to me. They talked for hours, usually late at night after the saloon closed, sitting in the room upstairs with a lamp burning low. Emmett told her about his life, about the white father who had abandoned him and his Chiricahua Apache mother, about growing up between two worlds and belonging fully to neither, about learning to survive alone in the mountains, because it was easier than dealing with people who could not decide if they hated him more for his white blood or his native blood. I always thought the loneliness would kill me eventually, he admitted one night, his hand playing with her hair as she leaned against him. But it was easier than trying to fit into places I was not wanted, until I met you. I know that feeling, Prudence said, tracing patterns on his chest through his shirt. Being unwanted, being the thing people wish they could ignore. We are neither of us unwanted now. Emmett caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything. Want to wake up next to you every morning. Want to build a life with you. Want to prove to you every day that you are loved exactly as you are. They had not made love yet, though Prudence suspected it was only a matter of time. Emmett was respectful of her inexperience, never pushing, but the tension between them was building every day. The way his eyes followed her movements, the way her breath caught when he touched her, the kisses that grew longer and deeper, leaving them both trembling and wanting. 3 weeks after Emmett came back to Hachita, he asked her to marry him. They were in the storage room, taking inventory, when he suddenly set down the ledger he had been checking and turned to her with an expression so serious it made her heart skip. Prudence, I need to ask you something. She put down her pencil, giving him her full attention. What is it? I know we have not been together long. I know people will say we are moving too fast, that we barely know each other. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. But I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my days making sure you know you are loved. Will you marry me? Prudence felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. Yes, she said, not hesitating, not second-guessing. Yes, Emmett, I will marry you. He swept her up in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around in the cramped space of the storage room, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, thoroughly, in a way that left no doubt about how he felt. I do not have a ring yet, he said against her lips, but I will get you one, the best one I can afford. I do not need a ring. Prudence cupped his face in her hands, looking into those green eyes that had seen her from the very beginning. I just need you. You have me. He said it like a vow. For the rest of my life, you have me. They were married 2 weeks later by the Reverend with Mrs. Henderson and a handful of curious townspeople as witnesses. Prudence wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Emmett had bought her, a simple but lovely thing in deep blue that he said matched the blue of her right eye. Emmett wore new clothes too, dark trousers and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the power in his frame. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and for the first time in her life, Prudence felt beautiful. The wedding night was everything she had secretly hoped for and nothing like she had feared. Emmett was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When he finally made her his wife in truth, Prudence understood why people wrote poetry about this, why something so simple as two bodies joining could feel so profound. It was not just physical. It was the vulnerability of being fully seen and fully accepted. It was trust made flesh. It was love in its most complete form. Afterward, lying in Emmett's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Prudence felt something she had never felt before. Peace. Complete, absolute peace with who she was and where she was and who she was with. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I do not think I even understood what love was before I met you, but I love you so much it terrifies me. Do not be terrified. Emmett's arms tightened around her, protective even in sleep. I will take care of you, Prudence. I swear it on my life. You are safe with me. You are loved. Always. She believed him. Against all odds, despite every experience that had taught her not to trust promises, she believed him. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Some people in Hachita never accepted them. never stopped seeing them as two misfits who had settled for each other because no one else would have them. Buck Morrison continued to cause trouble when he could, spreading rumors, and occasionally trying to intimidate Prudence when Emmett was not around. There were financial struggles too, months when the saloon barely made enough to cover expenses, when they had to stretch every dollar and wonder if they would make it through. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. Emmett proved to be a natural businessman, finding ways to increase revenue that had never occurred to Prudence or her father. He started offering simple meals along with the drinks, using game he hunted to keep costs low. He organized a weekly card game that drew players from neighboring towns. He made deals with suppliers, leveraging his knowledge of the territory and his connections from his trapping days. Slowly, steadily, the saloon became profitable in a way it had never been before. Prudence discovered she had a gift for managing people. With Emmett's support, she grew more confident in dealing with difficult customers. She learned when to be firm and when to be flexible. She earned a reputation for fairness that brought in business from people who appreciated honest dealing. Together, she and Emmett made a formidable team, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. More importantly, they were happy. Deliriously, surprisingly happy in a way that made other people either envious or suspicious. They worked together during the day and loved each other at night. They talked about everything and nothing. They laughed more than Prudence had laughed in her entire life before Emmett. They built the kind of partnership she had read about in books, but never believed existed in reality. "I want to show you the mountains," Emmett said one evening in late autumn as they were closing up the saloon for the night. "Now that we have money saved and the saloon is doing well, we could close for a few months like I mentioned. Go up into the high country before the worst of winter hits. I want you to see the places I love, Prudence. Want to share that part of my life with you." Prudence had never left Hachita. The idea of traveling into the mountains, of seeing new places, filled her with excitement and nervousness in equal measure. "What about the saloon, Mrs. Henderson's nephew needs work. We could hire him to watch the place, keep it from falling apart while we are gone." Emmett pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, as she always did. "I want to take you to this valley I know, where the aspens turn gold in the fall and the water runs so clear you can see fish swimming 20 feet down. Want to show you what real silence sounds like, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. Want to make love to you under the stars, where there is no one around for miles and we can be as loud as we want." She laughed, blushing at the last part. "When would we leave?" 2 weeks. That gives us time to prepare, make arrangements." His hands spanned her waist, thumbs stroking along her ribs. "Say yes, Prudence. Come away with me. Let me show you the world beyond this dusty town." How could she say no to that? "Yes," she agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Show me everything." They left Hachita on a crisp morning in early November, their supplies packed on 2 horses Emmett had purchased for the journey. Mrs. Henderson's nephew, a serious young man named Tom, had moved into their room above the saloon with strict instructions about how to run the place. Prudence felt a pang leaving her business in someone else's hands, but the excitement of the adventure ahead outweighed her anxiety. Emmett led them north and east, into the mountains that rose like distant blue shadows from the desert floor. The journey took 3 days, and with each mile they traveled, Prudence felt the weight of Hachita lifting from her shoulders. Out here, away from judgmental eyes and cruel whispers, she could breathe freely. She could laugh without wondering who was watching. She could ride beside her husband with her head high, and her mismatched eyes open to the beauty around her. The valley Emmett had described was even more beautiful than she had imagined. It sat in a bowl of mountains, surrounded by aspens that had turned brilliant gold with the season. A stream ran through the middle, crystal clear, just as he had promised, and there was a small cabin tucked into the trees that Emmett explained he had built years ago as a base for his trapping expeditions. "I never brought anyone here before," he said as they dismounted, his voice soft with the significance of sharing this place. "This was always my escape, my refuge, but I want it to be ours now. Want you to know that every part of my life, even the parts that came before you, are yours too." The cabin was rough but serviceable. One room with a stone fireplace and a bed Emmett had built from pine logs. It was isolated and primitive, nothing like the relative civilization of Hachita, but Prudence fell in love with it immediately. This was a place where no one would judge them, where they could simply be Emmett and Prudence, two people who loved each other. They settled into a routine that felt almost dreamlike in its simplicity. Emmett would hunt and fish, teaching Prudence how to track game and read signs in the forest. She learned to shoot his rifle with accuracy, to set snares for rabbits, to identify edible plants. In the evenings, they would cook together over the fire, then sit wrapped in blankets watching the stars wheel overhead. They made love often, with a freedom and abandon that would have been impossible in Hachita, where the saloon walls were thin and people were always listening. "I never knew life could be like this," Prudence admitted one night, lying in Emmett's arms after they had loved each other into exhaustion. "Peaceful, happy, I never knew I could feel so content." "Neither did I." Emmett kissed her forehead, his hand stroking through her hair. "I thought I was content alone, but I was just surviving. This, what we have, this is living." They stayed in the mountains for 2 months, and they were the best months of Prudence's life. Away from civilization, she discovered who she was beneath all the layers of hurt and shame that Hachita had piled on her. She was strong. She was capable. She was worthy of love. The beliefs that had defined her for so long fell away like old skin, revealing something new and precious underneath. When they finally returned to Hachita in late January, Prudence was different. She carried herself differently, spoke differently, looked people in the eye without flinching. The town had not changed, but she had, and that made all the difference. The whispers and stares that had once cut her to the bone now rolled off her like water. She knew who she was now. She knew what she was worth, and no amount of judgment could take that away. The saloon had survived their absence, though Tom looked relieved to hand back the responsibility. Business picked up again quickly with Emmett and Prudence back in charge, and they fell back into their routine of running the place together. But something had shifted. They were not just surviving anymore, not just fighting to keep their heads above water. They were building something lasting, something meaningful. Spring came to the New Mexico desert, bringing wildflowers and warm winds. Prudence discovered she was pregnant in early April, and the joy on Emmett's face when she told him was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He placed his large hands on her still flat stomach with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, awed. "Our baby. Prudence, you have given me everything." "We are in this together," she corrected, covering his hands with hers. "Everything we have, we built together." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Prudence suffered from sickness that lasted well into her 4th month. But Emmett was there every step of the way, holding her hair when she was ill, bringing her cool water, rubbing her aching feet at the end of long days. He took over more of the work at the saloon, insisting she rest as much as possible, and Prudence let him without feeling guilty. This was what partnership meant, taking care of each other through the hard times as well as the good. Their daughter was born in November, on a cold night when the wind howled outside and Prudence was sure she would die from the pain. But Emmett stayed with her through it all, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to leave even when Mrs. Henderson tried to send him out of the room as was proper. When the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Emmett cut the cord with shaking hands and placed her on Prudence's chest with tears streaming down his face. "She is beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "just like her mother." They named her Emma after Emmett, and from the moment Prudence looked into her daughter's eyes, one brown and one blue just like her own, she felt something profound shift in her heart. This child would grow up knowing she was loved. This child would never feel like her eyes made her wrong or unworthy. This child would have parents who thought she was perfect exactly as she was. "Her eyes," Mrs. Henderson said when she came to check on them the next day, and Prudence tensed, waiting for the judgment. But the old woman just smiled, a rare soft expression crossing her weathered face. "She has her mother's eyes. Lucky girl." Over the next few years, their family grew. Emma was followed by a son, Ethan, who had his father's green eyes and serious expression. Then another daughter, Eliza, who was all smiles and mischief from the day she was born. The saloon grew too, expanding to include a proper restaurant that Prudence managed while Emmett handled the bar and kept order. They became fixtures in Hachita, respected if not universally loved, known for fair dealing and honest work. Buck Morrison left town eventually, driven out by debts and his own mean nature. Others who had made Prudence's early life difficult either moved on or grew old enough to regret their cruelty. A new generation grew up in Hachita, one that knew Prudence only as Emmett Ellis's capable wife and the woman who ran the best saloon and restaurant in town. To them, her mismatched eyes were not a mark of wrongness, but just an interesting feature, something that made her memorable but not shameful. Prudence watched her children grow up free from the burdens she had carried, and it healed something in her she had not realized was still wounded. Emma never tried to hide her eyes. She wore her difference with pride, secure in the knowledge that her parents thought she was perfect. The boys in town who might have teased her quickly learned that her father was not a man to cross, and that her mother had taught her to stand up for herself with words sharp enough to cut deeper than any fist. "She is going to be a force to be reckoned with," Emmett said one evening, watching Emma argue with a boy who had suggested girls could not learn to shoot. She was 12 years old and already taller than most boys her age, with her father's confidence and her mother's steel spine. "Reminds me of someone." "I wonder who," Prudence said dryly, but she was smiling. She was always smiling these days, her face transformed from the sad, guarded expression she had worn for so many years into something open and warm. She was 38 years old, and she had never been happier. They still went to the mountains sometimes, when they could arrange it, leaving the saloon in Emma's capable hands as she got older. The cabin in the valley had become their retreat, the place they went to remember who they were beyond the demands of business and family. They would spend weeks there, just the two of them, remembering what it had been like in those early days when love was new and everything felt possible. "Do you ever regret it?" Prudence asked one night, lying under the stars like they used to. They were both graying now, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but Emmett still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "Staying in Hachita instead of living up here full-time, tying yourself to me and the saloon instead of keeping your freedom. Never." Emmett pulled her closer, his arms still strong despite the years. "Not once. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted, Prudence. A home. A family. A reason to wake up grateful every morning. The mountains are beautiful, but they are empty without you. Everywhere is empty without you." She kissed him then, pouring 20 years of love into it, and he responded with the same passion he had shown that first time. proving that some things did not fade with age. They made love under the stars like they had when they were young, and afterward, lying in his arms, Prudence thought about the girl she had been when they met. Lonely and afraid, convinced she was unlovable, hiding from a world that had never been kind to her. That girl would not believe this life was possible. Would not believe that the mountain man who said 3 kind words about her eyes would end up saying thousands more, day after day, year after year, until the hurt of those early years faded to distant memory. Would not believe she could be this happy, this loved, this whole. But it was all real. Every beautiful, impossible bit of it. Emma took over the saloon when Prudence and Emmett were in their 50s, running it with the same blend of firmness and fairness her parents had shown. Ethan became a carpenter, building houses all over the territory. Eliza married a doctor and moved to Santa Fe, but visited often with her own growing family. The saloon thrived under Emma's management, becoming not just a business but a gathering place, a landmark in Hachita's continuing evolution from rough desert town to established community. Prudence and Emmett spent more and more time in the mountains as they aged, finding that the peace of the high country suited them better than the bustle of town life. They would spend whole summers in the valley, coming down only when the first snows threatened or when Emma sent word that she needed them for something important. "We built a good life," Prudence said one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the aspens turn gold again. She was 63 now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands marked by age and work. But her eyes were still the same, one brown and one blue, and Emmett still looked into them every day and told her they were beautiful. "Against all odds, we built something that lasted. We did." Emmett took her hand, his own hand scarred and weathered but still strong. "We took all that hurt and loneliness and turned it into love, turned it into a family and a business and a life worth living. I am proud of us, Prudence, proud of everything we built together." She leaned against his shoulder, fitting into his side like she had been made to be there, and together they watched the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Their story had started with 3 words spoken by a stranger to a lonely woman in a dusty saloon. "Your eyes are remarkable, beautiful." It had continued with a promise to stay, a proposal in a storage room, a wedding attended by strangers who became friends. It had grown through hard work and harder times, through children and challenges and small victories that added up to a life. And now, in the quiet of their later years, it continued still. 2 people who had been told they were wrong, were unlovable, proving every day that love could transform everything. That kindness could heal wounds that had seemed permanent. That family was not something you were born into, but something you built with intention and care. "I love you," Prudence said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after all these years. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond if there is anything after." "I know," Emmett said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You tell me every day, and every day I will tell you the same. Your eyes are remarkable, Prudence Ellis. They are beautiful, and you are the best thing that ever happened to me." She did look away then, but not from shame or discomfort. She looked away to hide the tears of joy that still came sometimes when she was reminded of how far she had traveled from that scared girl in the saloon. And when she looked back, Emmett was waiting, as he always was, ready to remind her that she was loved, that she was seen, that she was exactly right just as she was. They lived many more years in that valley, growing old together in the place they loved best. They were blessed with grandchildren who came to visit, filling the cabin with laughter and noise and love. They were blessed with health enough to enjoy their later years, with each other's company to make every day meaningful. And when the end finally came, they went together, as they had done everything else in their life. Emma found them in the cabin one autumn morning, sitting together on the porch bench they had built 30 years earlier. Emmett's arm was around Prudence, her head on his shoulder, and they looked peaceful, like they had simply fallen asleep watching the sunrise. The doctor said their hearts had given out within minutes of each other, and Emma chose to believe that was true. Her parents had been inseparable in life. It made sense they would not be parted in death. They were buried in the valley they loved, under the aspens that turned gold every fall. In Emma, who ran the saloon with the same fairness her parents had shown, who taught her own daughter that different was not the same as wrong. In Ethan, who built homes strong enough to last generations. In Eliza, who raised her children to see people for who they were, rather than what they looked like. In grandchildren and great-grandchildren who grew up hearing the story of how their grandparents met, how 3 kind words about a woman's eyes had started a love story that changed everything. The saloon still stood in Hachita, though the town around it had changed and grown. It was called Ellis's now, and above the bar hung a painting that Emma had commissioned, showing her parents as they had been in their youth. Emmett, tall and powerful and protective, his arm around Prudence, who was looking up at him with those remarkable mismatched eyes, one brown and one blue, full of love and trust and joy. Visitors to Hachita would sometimes ask about the painting, about the unusual eyes of the woman, and whoever was working the bar would smile and tell them the story. How a lonely woman with mismatched eyes had been told her whole life she was wrong. How a mountain man had walked into her saloon one day and said 3 words that changed her life. How they had built a love that lasted half a century, proving that the things that make us different are often the things that make us extraordinary. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blew down from the mountains, people swore they could feel something in the saloon, a presence warm and protective and loving. The spirit of a couple who had loved each other so deeply that even death could not completely break their bond. Who had turned pain into purpose, loneliness into family, and 3 simple words into a lifetime of devotion. No man had ever said a kind word about her eyes, until Emmett Ellis said 3 and watched her look away, overwhelmed by a kindness she had never known she deserved. And in that moment, both their lives had changed forever, setting them on a path that would lead to love and family and a happiness neither had believed possible. It was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, messy, imperfect, and absolutely true. It was the story of 2 people who found each other in the wilderness, in more ways than one, and built a love that would echo through generations. The mountains still stood, eternal and unchanging, where their cabin slowly weathered back into the earth. The aspens still turned gold every autumn, marking the seasons that continued with or without them. The stream still ran clear and cold, reflecting sky and trees and the passage of time. And somewhere in that valley, in the wind that whispered through the aspens and the sunlight that dappled the forest floor, the love of Emmett and Prudence Ellis lived on, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of speaking kindness into lives that had known too little of it, and of building something lasting from the broken pieces of 2 lonely hearts. Their story ended where all love stories must, with death claiming what time could not destroy. But it also continued, in the children they raised, in the business they built, in the town that grew up around them, in the memory of anyone who ever heard their tale and thought maybe, just maybe, love like that was possible. Maybe being different was not wrong. Maybe the right person would see you exactly as you were and call you beautiful. Maybe 3 words from a stranger could change everything. And maybe, in a dusty saloon in Hachita, New Mexico, in the year 1879. A woman with mismatched eyes and a mountain man with nowhere else to go had found exactly what they needed in each other. Found home, found love, found the courage to believe that they deserved happiness. Found that the wilderness could be tamed, that loneliness could be vanquished, and that sometimes, against all odds, two broken people could come together and make something whole. That was the truth of Emmett and Prudence Ellis. That was their legacy. And that was the story their family would tell for generations to come, keeping alive the memory of a love that had refused to be diminished by prejudice or hardship, that had burned bright and true for more than half a century, and that had proved, beyond any doubt, that the courage to love and be loved can transform absolutely everything.